Welcome back. Well, we were talking about the Tory leadership, and your mail mogs have been coming in. Robert says, all of the Tory hopefuls have their qualities, but no one person stands out above all the rest. For the Tories to fight the next election successfully, they need a charismatic leader in the mould of Boris Johnson, though Boris is now yesterday's man. Whoever wins, the rest must unite and not squabble among themselves. And Pat says, all six might have something good to say individually, but are any singing from the same song sheet on all issues? An interesting point from Ken. Ken's very happy today. Ken says, hurrah, my favourite panel tonight. Stella is valiantly putting Labour's side of the argument, and Kelvin is Jack D without the jokes. Well, we'll have to find out more about Mr. D in a moment. Now, very sad news. At least 12 migrants are dead, 2 are missing, and several have been injured after their boat capsized in the Channel earlier today. Over 50 people have been rescued from what has been called the deadliest disaster this year. 10 are confirmed to be female, including a pregnant woman, and therefore an unborn child has died as well, and 6 minors. The Home Secretary, Yvette Cooper, has called the event horrifying and has said that the crackdown on smuggling gangs must proceed apace. But does this tragedy merely show that deterrence is needed urgently? I'm joined now by the Deputy Leader of the Reform Party, Richard Tice. Richard, thank you very much for joining me. This is desperately sad news, isn't it?
It's utterly horrific, Jacob, and sadly was completely predictable. Just 3 days ago, there was almost the capsize of a boat with some 60 people in, and I tweeted out that a major tragedy is probably imminent. And 3 days later, tragically, I've been proven correct. Yesterday, a boat capsized with some 50 people in it, and this is the only way this will stop. The only way the deaths will stop, and about 40 people now have died this year alone trying to cross the English Channel, is if you pick up and take back. And do you know what makes me absolutely sick with fury and rage is the bleating and whining of people like Care for Calais and the Refugee Council and other do-good bodies who say we need more safe and legal routes. The only way to stop these deaths and this tragedy is to pick up and take back. And yet these lefty, lovey-dovey lawyers, they continue to stop what needs to be done to be kind and compassionate and stop the deaths. And this is compounded by the fact now that it seems the men on these boats are taking the life jackets and leaving the women and the children completely defenceless.
I mean, it is an appalling story, and it does make the point again that we need to stop the boats, not just talking platitudes about it. And the government seems to me to be really adopting the platitude line at the moment, saying we must stop the gangs, but without any policy of how to do it, hoping that things will get better, but having taken away all the mechanisms by which there could be any deterrence. And indeed, making claiming asylum in the UK legal again if you come on a small boat, whereas, of course, it was illegal under the last government.
So what we're actually seeing is that having removed any form of deterrent, the numbers are increasing, and the gangs, far from being scared about the Home Secretary's promise to smash the gangs, they're actually saying this is an opportunity. The deterrent is going away. The likelihood of being granted asylum has dramatically increased under this new government. And so they're cramming these increasingly frail and fragile single-use dinghies with ever more people. It seems this dinghy, literally the bottom ripped out of it. So many people were clambering on board. And it's a very simple, legally allowable situation that has to prevail here. Both the French authorities, who are aiding and abetting criminality by allowing these boats to be sort of taxied over by the French Navy, and the British authorities have got to say, it ends. It stops now. We pick up and take back. And we know it works. We know it's legal because the Belgian authorities have done it. And on one day since being the new government, the border force under the new Labour government did exactly the same thing when a boat got into trouble. The moment we do that, this whole nightmare, these tragedies and these deaths stop within 2 to 3 weeks. And it's utterly inexcusable, unforgivable, blood on the hands of the government, the Home Secretary, the Prime Minister, and all of these people who will not do this.
But, Richard, how can you do that if the French won't take them back? So I assume that reform policy is to send people back. But if the French aren't willing to take them back, once they've got into UK territorial waters, is it realistic to send them back to France? We may want to do that. We may think it's a good idea. But the French have to accept them.
No, they don't. Under international maritime law, and we are a rules-based nation, and this government constantly says it complies with international law. The 1982 Convention of the Law at Sea clearly gives us that legal right to pick up and take back, and it provides a legal obligation on the French to pick up and take back. And yet no one has the courage, the guts, the leadership to read the treaty and then act upon it.
But there's always a question in international law about enforceability, because there's no court that can rule on this. And if the reality is the French aren't taking them back, I just don't see how you can compel the French to take them, that it requires their support and cooperation, and that just isn't there. That's simply not true. And they've got two choices when it comes to it, right? If we say they're not crossing the 12-mile line and we're going to pick up and take back, which is what should happen, then the French have either got to do a deal with us and create a rapid processing centre in northern France, or they're going to shoot us. Well, they're not going to shoot us, Jacob, so they're going to do a deal with us. But this requires leadership. That's what we expect our government to do. And it requires courage. And we keep hearing from people like the Foreign Secretary, David Lammy, talk about tough choices, and the Chancellor talk about tough choices. Well, this is actually quite an easy choice. It saves people's lives. Well, Richard, thank you. I really rather like the fact that reform's policy is to retake Calais, put right the wrong that was done to Mary Tudor. Thank you. With me now is my panel, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the PR consultant and former Labour aide, Stella Santachido. Stella, Richard's got a point, hasn't he, that actually Labour's weakness since it's been in government makes these tragedies more likely.
Weakness?
Weakness.
Under the Labour government, we had a flight deporting illegal immigrants who did not have their asylum applications accepted. It was record levels, record numbers of people were deported.
But they've made everybody now able to claim asylum, whereas beforehand they were illegal immigrants. They've got rid of the Rwanda scheme. They have no deterrence to coming over.
If someone is an asylum seeker, if someone is a refugee, then they should be allowed to apply for an asylum under international law, and they should be able to have their status approved or rejected. My question is about the Rwanda policy being a deterrent. We know that the Rwanda policy, for an insane amount of number, the IPPR was saying that it was £150,000 per person for the processing and the integration alone, and this is to deal with less than 2% of asylum seekers. Now, if this is a deterrent, can you explain to me how the chances of them dying, they know that people are dying on these dinghies, right? And yet they still continue to make this journey. So how is it not a deterrent that they could meet their deaths?
The percentages are very much lower. That if you got to the point where you were able to deport new arrivals to Rwanda, you would have a very high percentage of new arrivals, and that would turn the tap off.
But people are being deported already. Record numbers are being deported under Labour.
Actually, the Conservatives got people to go back to Albania, but they can't get them to go back to Syria or to Afghanistan, and they can't get people who are undocumented to
Syria and Afghanistan. There are good reasons why they can't get them back.
That's why Rwanda was such a good answer, because it was a safe place for them to go.
But why was it a good answer when you have refugees who have a legitimate claim? And there are refugees from Afghanistan, for example, who have helped the British government, who have a legitimate claim to claim asylum here.
They have different ways of doing it. Let me bring you in.
Can I just make a point about Afghanistan? If we're going to say that there are legitimate refugees, basically the whole of Afghanistan could come here.
Well, 750 million people could come here from around the world.
It's preposterous. I mean, very nice to see Greeks come here, but I do not want the whole of the Muslim world turning up in Dover. I just don't. And so Tice had a good had an explanation. He was prepared to take on the French. Now, the problem with taking on the French, and by the way, I blame the Conservatives as much as I blame anybody else. And the idea, Yvette Cooper saying smash the gangs, Storm will smash the gangs. Here we are, we're 2 months into it. We can smash the pensioners, but we can't seem to smash the gangs. You know, it is not going to happen. These people are clever, huge amounts of money. I mean, with 70 people on board paying £5,000, that's 350,000 quid a boat. I mean, it is not going to happen. I like the idea of pushing back. The French, in turn, will say, right, well, we're turning off your power, right? Because actually, we are in the strange position of actually having to rely on French energy in order to keep the lights on. So we have to work out what is in our own interest. Are we really going to do this? And if we're going to do it, it would have my support. But it could well lead to the point that Mr. Tice was making, was that there might be violence. And I suspect there could be.
Well, he was saying the French wouldn't shoot us, which is slightly reassuring. But I did think Richard was gearing up to cancel the Entente Cordiale and go back to where we were at Waterloo.
All I'm saying is we need to have a solution. Just look at Germany when you haven't got a solution. When you invite 1.5 million people in, what have we got today? We have a, by the way, the reform correctly actually say we are not the AfD of the UK, which is good news, right? But this is what we're going to get. Unless we deal with this issue, we are going to end up with a very, very right-wing government.
Calvin's right. This lefty liberal consensus that does nothing actually encourages the rise of the far right. And that's really dangerous. We've seen it in Europe, we've seen it in France, we've seen it in Germany, but that's dangerous for the body politic. And therefore, moderate, sensible politicians need to deal with this problem.
I don't see any lefty in the current Labour government.
You see no lefty in the current Labour government?
I see no lefty. 55% of the British public believe that immigration has a positive impact on the development on the UK. That's double the number of people in France and people in Germany who believe the same thing. So the British people are still very, very much pro-immigration. Having said that, I do agree with you, Kelvin. The UK does not have the resources right now to absorb the entire Afghanistan. The good news is that about 80% of refugees are usually absorbed by neighbouring countries, so the UK is not asked to do that. The numbers of asylum seekers, just 1 in 12 immigrants from outside the UK are asylum seekers. So that's a very, very small number. The Labour Party is doing the correct solution, which is they are taking care of the applications, they are deporting the ones who are illegal, and they are allowing those who are not illegal, who are actually refugees, to train and develop skills and integrate and start working so that they don't depend on the taxpayer.
All right. Well, thank you very much to my panel, as pugnacious as ever.